I think every One Piece fan can remember where the story was when they finally caught up. Maybe you are one of the people who joined during the 2020s anime boom, and when you finally reached the current episode, it was just as Kaido and Luffy were squaring up to fight. Maybe you're one of those people who was scrolling through forums in the early 2000s, watching bootleg clips of Arlong Park. Personally, I caught up to the One Piece anime for the first time during Marineford, and I still have the font of those fan subs burned into my brain. On that day, I remember watching the action at Navy HQ and thinking to myself, gee, I hope we get another scene with Boa Hancock soon. I have been a huge fan of Boa Hancock and the Amazon Lily arc since middle school. I remember sitting at a friend's house using his computer to watch the episode where Luffy one-shots that giant panther and thinking, it simply could not get any better than this. I remember seeing Hancock's backstory for the first time and becoming so enraged that I carried those thoughts with me to school the next day. Luffy saying hammock became a vocal stim. I was a child. But as I got older, my appreciation for the arc only grew. The more I learned about the world around me, the more I couldn't help but make connections to that wacky island of women out in the Grand Line. Of course, as the other videos on this channel show, there have been a lot of things that have enriched my reading of One Piece over the years. But Amazon Lily in particular has always seemed close to hand. When the co-host of this channel, Joe, who you'll hear from later, finally got to the arc in their watch through, a decade had passed since my first encounter. But the feelings were still fresh, and when they reached out to me, unprompted, to tell me how much they love the arc, I was over the moon. You see, in that decade, I had discovered that the arc was far from a fan favorite. It's never high up on people's rankings, and there is an absolutely abysmal drought of content on it. As we talked about all the cool things going on in the arc, we also inevitably ended up talking about how badly the arc had been ignored by much of the fanbase, and how badly it had been mistreated by the various content creators on YouTube, even those who have made a career out of analyzing every minute detail of the series. You know, it kinda sucked seeing ProZD rank it as the worst arc in the series, but it isn't like he's a particularly important voice or anything. It sucked seeing Daniel Green call the arc filler, but whatever I guess, not a big deal coming from the fantasy YouTuber. It hit harder seeing Grand Line Review put it as their second worst arc, especially because their criticisms of it made absolutely no sense.
All in all, everything in this arc played out like a typical shonen harem story. It just didn't feel like One Piece up until we were leaving the island and therefore the arc.
Bro, what the fuck arc did you watch? Do you think that a harem is just a word for like a group of women? Like any group of women is a harem? Like what are you talking about? And it was painful to the point of comedy when Mr. Morge released their video, The Best Thing About Each One Piece Arc, and this was all they had to say about Amazon Lily.
Amazon Lily's greatest strength is probably just its fan service, if we're being honest.
Again, what arc did you watch? Where was the fan service? Is it because it's an island of women? Are women existing fan service? This guy gets paid to think. When we decided to start this channel, we knew we would have to cover Amazon Lily at some point. Since even the people who have made careers out of analyzing the series can't seem to think of anything to say about it, we figured we should show them how it's done. And for the other Amazon Lily fans out there, we knew we had to fill that void. So this video is not just an Amazon Lily video essay. This video is 4 Amazon Lily video essays. Firstly, there's the one you're watching right now. Then we are going to look at the arc through 3 different analytical lenses to try to give you a better picture of what all is actually happening inside it. At the end, we'll come back to talk briefly about the fan reception of the arc and why, despite the many rich readings of the text possible, it has been so overlooked. It's going to be a long one, but don't look away, or the Gorgon curse will get you. Part 1. Political Analysis. Manichaeism, Man-Hating, and Intersectionality. Decolonial revolutionary and writer Frantz Fanon's classic text, The Wretched of the Earth, is full of deep insights and incredibly useful concepts. As a trained psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, Fanon is particularly adept at exploring the ways in which the experience of colonialism changes the psychological makeup of both the colonized and the colonizer. Among his many astute observations, this one has always stood out to me. On the logical plane, the Manichaeism of the settler produces a Manichaeism of the native. To the theory of the absolute evil of the native, the theory of the absolute evil of the settler replies. For those who don't know, Manichaeism was a religious movement that preached that all of reality was constructed from an ongoing spiritual battle between lightness and darkness. While the religion no longer exists in any sort of formal or organized way, its name is still used to this day as a shorthand for that kind of black and white thinking. You're either light or dark. You're either good or bad. And that is the way that Fanon is using the term. His point is that in the process of colonization, which necessarily hinges on the existence of a life or death struggle between two groups, this kind of Manichaean thinking emerges. The European sets himself the task of conquering the African, and soon he begins to think in terms of whites and blacks. White supremacy is the ideological expression and justification for a real system of oppression. The colonizer, the oppressor, sets up his idea of the world. White is good. Black is bad. However, colonized peoples do not take this lying down. They do not simply go on thinking as they did before, because they are now confronted by the violence of oppression. They also, for the most part, don't just passively accept white supremacy as the end of the debate. Instead, many of them react by constructing their own Manichaeism. Black is good. White is bad. They simply reverse the formula. And Fanon's point is that this is not usually a rationally planned out response, but an immediate psychological reflex. Fuck me? No. Fuck you. We see this exact dynamic with the fishmen in One Piece. After years of racial discrimination and being told that they are lesser beings, many of the fishmen have responded, quite naturally, by flipping that worldview on its head. When Arlong declares that fishmen are a superior race, he is simply mirroring the statements of the Celestial Dragons. This adds a real nuance to his place as a villain, as Oda explores at some depth during the Fishman Island arc. Arlong did not invent these racist hierarchies. He responded to them. And while what he did was wrong, it must be understood as a natural outcome of the system imposed on his people. Obviously, what Hachi did was wrong, but there was no reason to believe he would have turned out that way if the Celestial Dragons hadn't been trying to put a bullet in him every day of his entire life. Nami can forgive Hachi, but there's only one way to deal with a Charlos. One of the reasons I love this little bit from Fanon is that it can be observed in basically all forms of oppression. And yes, that does include patriarchy. Anti-feminists love to accuse feminists of being man-haters, and the usual response is for feminists to assure men that, no, these women don't hate men. They just want better for everyone. And that's true for the most part. But there are feminists who hate men. Not because they're evil or stuck up or whatever other misogynistic trope you might want to throw out there, but because they have a lot of reasons to hate men, and because they have been told every day of their life that one of these genders must be the inferior one. My favorite example of this kind of thinking can be found in Valerie Solanas' bona fide banger, The Scum Manifesto. Scum here stands for Society for Cutting Up Men. In this classic, Solanas argues for the inferiority of the male sex and the need for its elimination. Along the way, she reproduces basically every sexist argument from the history of Western thought, but in reverse. Ancient Greek philosophers had argued that women were immature, or, in Aristotle's view, imperfect, versions of the fully developed male ideal. Solanas responds by claiming that the male is an incomplete female. I'm not even going to touch on the fact that ancient Greeks were like, damn, a woman is just like a teenage boy. Cause, bro, we know you think that. In reply to sexist Freudian theories about penis envy, she writes, women don't have penis envy, men have pussy envy. Which, yeah, honestly, she got me, okay? I can't lie. Sexist philosophers had said for literally thousands of years that men were active and women were passive. So Solanas came up with her theory of male passivity. The whole book is like this. It's the world's most elaborate, I know you are, but what am I? Although Solanas clearly took it very seriously, some later readers have even interpreted the text as satire because these reversals are so on the nose. Solanas reflected the patriarchy back into itself. Against the Manichaeism of male supremacy, she asserted its opposite, a Manichaean account of female superiority, where all the good qualities are feminine and all the bad qualities are masculine. And, by the way, the manifesto is short. You can read it in an afternoon, and you genuinely should. It's one of the funniest, most engaging political works you'll ever find. It's not correct, and basically none of her points hold up to basic scrutiny, but damn is it fun. And how often is politics fun, huh? In art, the best portrayal of this reverse sexism, this feminist manichaeism, is probably the film Miss 45. But Amazon Lily is also a pretty good one. Right from her introduction, we know what Boa Hancock and her crew think of men. They hate them. Men are banned from entering Amazon Lily, and the penalty for violating this sacred law is death. At every turn, Hancock expects the absolute worst from men, and she's basically always right. She assumes the men on the Navy ship are objectifying her, and guess what? They are. That's why she's able to turn them to stone. Early in the arc, whenever she's talking to Luffy, she refuses to use his name and instead throws around the word man like it's a slur. In essence, Hancock believes that men are evil by nature. At first, this might seem like Oda is depicting a stereotypical depiction of a stuck-up, man-hating woman. But then we learn her backstory. We learn that, after being raised on the Island of Women, Hancock and her sisters were abducted at sea, enslaved, and tortured for 4 years at the hands of the Celestial Dragons. As Hancock puts it, the first man she ever saw instilled an undying fear in her. During that ordeal, Hancock was also force-fed the love fruit, a violation that certainly carries some disturbing and gendered implications. Hancock is unquestionably a man-hater. But can you blame her? Her misandry is only a response to the horrific violence that was inflicted upon her and her sisters. Male celestial dragons oppressed her, told her for years that she was subhuman and that they were superhuman, that they represented all that was good and powerful in the world. Even if it isn't ultimately healthy or correct, her response seems completely natural. It is the Manichaeism of the oppressor that has produced the Manichaeism of the oppressed. Fanon also observes that, in the context of colonial Manichaeism, the racism of the colonizer is a racism of contempt, while the racism of the colonized is ultimately one of fear. Not all hatred is built the same. The colonizer must have contempt to continue the violence of colonialism. The colonized must live in fear that they will be the subject of that violence. We could just as easily say that Boa's sexism is a sexism of fear, the sexism of the Celestial Dragons, who sadistically and regularly torture women for their own amusement, is undoubtedly based in an extreme contempt. But Hancock is ultimately operating from a position of fear. She says so herself when she tells Luffy, "I don't want anyone to control me ever again. I'm afraid of being vulnerable to anyone, and I always will be." This is a nuance that elevates Oda's work in this arc above the typical cycle of hatred bullshit that you see in most shonen manga. Oda isn't trying to equivocate. It would be so easy for him to just say, women hating is bad, but man hating is also bad, and leave it at that. Instead, he introduces a distinction between the two, and while he certainly doesn't say that man hating is good, he at least wants the reader to see it as understandable, a position that you can have some kind of empathy for because of what has informed it. It's the same with the racism of the fishmen. Oda is not saying that it is good when oppressed groups adopt bigoted political frameworks and worldviews. He's saying that it's inevitable within the existing system, and something we can't just wish away. Interestingly, Oda does present us with a solution. How do we stop women from uncritically hating all men? We, as men, fight alongside them in their struggles. Again, we can turn to Fanon for an instructive passage, which is a bit longer, but well worth quoting. In their weary road toward rational knowledge, the people must also give up their too simple conception of their overlords. As they look around them, they notice that certain settlers do not join in the general guilty hysteria. There are differences in the same species. Such men, who before were included without distinction and indiscriminately in the monolithic mass of the foreigner's presence, actually go so far as to condemn the colonial war. The scandal explodes when the prototypes of this division of the species go over to the enemy and accept suffering, torture, and death. Such examples disarm the general hatred that the native feels toward the foreign settlement. The native surrounds these few men with warm affection and tends by a kind of emotional overvaluation to place absolute confidence in them. Many members of the mass of the colonialists reveal themselves to be much, much nearer to the national struggle than certain sons of the nation. The barriers of blood and race prejudice are broken down on both sides. According to Fanon, since these various and competing racist ideologies are the result of the colonial system, they can only be overtaken in people's minds by real attacks on that system. The colonized do not need to find it in their hearts to forgive every settler. Instead, they simply have to reckon with the fact that some of those settlers are standing next to them, shooting at their enemies and taking bullets for their cause. But of course, that can only happen if settlers do defect from the cause. Once again, this dynamic is explicitly explored in One Piece. Oda doesn't write arcs where the fishmen are scolded for reacting poorly to racial injustice. He writes arcs where Luffy punches slave owners in the face. What is it that allows Hancock to ultimately trust Luffy with her backstory? She learns that he struck a celestial dragon down in broad daylight and suffered the wrath of the world government for it. He put himself on her side. The only other men who Hancock seems to respect are Fisher Tiger, who led the slave rebellion that freed her, and Rayleigh, who helped her escape to Amazon Lily as a runaway. These are the men who challenge Hancock's simplistic and sexist view of the world. Men who fight for women. Men who treat the cause of women's liberation as their own cause, who make it their problem. Men who go over to the enemy and accept suffering, torture, and even death. And if Fanon says this can lead the oppressed to a kind of emotional overvaluation of these rebels, my god, I don't know if you could think of a better phrase to describe how Hancock feels about Luffy. There's also something to be said for the fact that Oda chooses the same act, punching Charlos, to represent both a defense of Hachi from racism and a display of sympathy for the plight of Hancock against sexism. In the same way, Fisher Tiger's rebellion was explicitly motivated by anti-racism, but it also led to the Boa sisters being freed from misogynistic slavery. Both the Fishmen and the Amazonians have been branded by the Celestial Dragons. In a modern, intersectional way, Oda collapses sexism and racism into one system, where the same powers perpetuate both. It isn't just me drawing out the comparison between colonialism and patriarchy. That's what Oda is doing as well. In particular, he's exploring the shared psychological effects of both, the ways in which being oppressed, in whatever form, tends to change you. And while I don't have any reason to believe that Oda has read Frantz Fanon, it's clear that he has seriously thought about these issues and come to some similar conclusions. And Amazon Lily functions like a key to unlock this whole dimension of the series. These themes reverberate elsewhere, but they're never this explicit again. Or, it's like filler or something. Also, since I probably won't have another opportunity to mention this, Grant Morrison and Yannick Paquette's Wonder Woman Earth 1 pulls some pretty similar moves by making Steve Trevor black and drawing on the bit of Wonder Woman lore about how the Amazons used to be enslaved. It's definitely not a book for everyone, but it's got some truly funky politics, beautiful Amazonians, and the kind of big-brain character reimagining that makes Morrison's DC work so enjoyable to read. Check it out, and then send me messages about how much you hated it. Part 2. Psychoanalytic Analysis. Empathy for a Narcissist. Unfortunately, narcissism has become an internet boogeyman word that people use to mean evil and selfish. But if you can look past the endless nightmare that is pop psychology, the term has real and useful clinical meaning. People suffering from narcissistic disorders are not aliens or demons out to get you. They are people suffering from narcissistic disorders. And like people suffering from anxious or depressive disorders, they deserve to be taken seriously and offered the help they need to become better adjusted. Narcissistic individuals are also not a monolith, and they must be treated as individuals. And one such narcissistically organized individual is none other than the Pirate Empress herself, Boa Hancock. In fact, hers is a rather classic case. Psychology professor and practicing psychotherapist Nancy McWilliams has written extensively about narcissistic disorders in her wonderful book, Psychoanalytic Diagnosis, and we will be using the second edition of that text extensively in the discussion that follows. For McWilliams, as she writes in the opening of the relevant chapter in her book, the term narcissistic refers to people whose personalities are organized around maintaining their self-esteem. These individuals typically display either patterns of grandiosity and entitlement or patterns of severe self-denigration and depression, and often will alternate between these two states over the course of their life. In any case, they are incredibly obsessed with not only their self-perception, but the perceptions of others, and they tend to seek affirmation from others for their narcissistic tendencies. Now, I think it's obvious that Hancock falls on the grandiose side of that line, and like a typical grandiose narcissist, she raises herself by putting down others. This is exemplified most clearly by her iconic looking down pose, where she looks down on people so hard that she actually ends up looking up. It's a silly Oda-style take on the idea, but it's also a pretty apt visual metaphor. Hancock has a ludicrously inflated sense of self. As McWilliams says, though, what narcissistic people of all appearances have in common is an inner sense of, and or terror of, insufficiency, shame, weakness, and inferiority. She writes, "Many have noted that in every vain, grandiose narcissist hides a self-conscious, shame-faced child." This is also obviously true of Hancock. Her grandiose presentation originates from a place of insecurity. She is absolutely terrified of weakness, as she seemingly blames her own weakness for her previous suffering at the hands of the celestial dragons. She feels that she must project strength and indifference as a matter of survival. It's crucial to mention here that this does not mean her posturing is an act, as some have claimed. Rather, it is a compulsion. She feels compelled by her own internal instabilities to project that image. Narcissistically organized individuals often feel the need to run to the realm of images as a way to escape their inner turmoil. McWilliams again, "Image replaces substance, and what Jung called the persona, the self one shows to the world, becomes more vivid and dependable than one's actual person." Hancock is running to images every time she feels the need to remind the world of her beauty. She brings it up multiple times within a few chapters of her introduction. It is a compulsion, particularly when she feels that she is being challenged. Luffy's refusal to acknowledge her beauty, to fall under her spell, is so crippling for Hancock, not simply because she is vain, but because he is refusing to feed into her coping mechanism. When we first see Hancock say in distress, "This can't be happening. No man can resist me. His existence is intolerable," it is easy to dismiss her as simply an egomaniac. But upon learning more about her, the scene takes on a truly somber tone. Why is the existence of a man who can resist her beauty so intolerable? Because it means that she cannot use her powers on him. She cannot minimize him. There is a chance, in fact, that he could minimize her. He could make her feel small, like a 12-year-old girl wrapped in chains. Not only is it a physical vulnerability, as her powers won't work on him, it is a potent psychological vulnerability. Luffy is telling her that she cannot run to images. She must face his judgment for who she is as a person. And she feels certain such a judgment would not be positive, that he would judge her harshly for what she has been through. In fact, Hancock assumes that of everyone. Even her own citizens, who love and adore her, she is convinced would turn on her if they knew anything beyond the images. It's important to note that we are never given any implication that that would be the case. Can you really imagine someone like Margaret switching up on Hancock after learning of her struggles? I don't even think that idea is worth entertaining. But Hancock is suffering from a neurotic condition and simply can't see that. In her mind, there is always the chance that she would be judged harshly, and that is what she truly finds intolerable. She can't even bear the possibility. She's too aware of what that might do to her. As McWilliams writes, narcissistically structured people are aware at some level of their psychological fragility. They are afraid of falling apart, of precipitously losing their self-esteem or self-coherence, e.g. when criticized, and abruptly feeling like nobody rather than somebody. They sense that their identity is too tenuous to hold together and weather some strain. McWilliams also reports that the clinical literature on narcissistic personality organizations consistently emphasizes the central place of shame for the emotional life of the patient. Shame here refers to a sense of being perceived as bad or wrong, and it carries connotations of helplessness, ugliness, and impotence. These are all obviously observable in Hancock's case. If she were to list her 3 biggest fears, they would probably be helplessness, ugliness, and impotence, which of course are all related, especially in her case. Even after working up the courage to tell Luffy her backstory, she still defensively asks him if he now thinks less of her. she is incredibly preoccupied with being seen as bad or wrong. Narcissists are also resistant to gratitude because to thank someone for something, to admit that you need help or have desires you can't meet on your own, is an admission of a lack. To do that would mean to declare their own dependency on others, their own incompleteness within themselves. That would be a display of vulnerability, and that simply can't happen. So it doesn't matter that Gloriosa helped bring her back to Amazon Lily. Hancock can't seriously consider showing gratitude for that. The children of the island have built a statue in her honor? Well, it's bad and making the room dirty. What, is she supposed to admit that she can be emotionally affected by the acts of children? Should she open herself up to the possibility that they will at some point turn on her, crushing her fragile ego in the process? Don't be ridiculous. Oh, you don't believe that she's completely indifferent and doesn't care about anything? Well, she'll kick a kitten for being in her way to show you how invulnerable she is to regular human emotions and standards of taste. Feelings of guilt are also pushed away, because a narcissistically organized person can't even be dependent on others for forgiveness. She can't let anyone in. Imagine what they might do once inside. This is exactly the situation Granny Nyan is describing when she says that Hancock hasn't shown emotion for years, and that she was afraid the great snake princess's heart had frozen solid. Hancock, suffering terribly from her narcissistic disorder, has done everything in her power to kill her inner life and run to the realm of images. She has almost completely run away from her past as a slave and escaped into the image of the great snake princess, the pirate empress, the most beautiful woman in the world. I think that is the ultimate tragedy of her character. It's what makes her so compelling and what causes so many of us to cheer her on, to want her to succeed. Like many of us, Hancock has spent far too much of her life anxiously avoiding a breakdown that has already occurred. She thinks that if she can lie to all the right people, avoid her own insecurities, and never form any real relationships, then maybe she can escape the pain she sees on the horizon. She doesn't realize what she has twisted herself into, the deformed state of her being. She is ruining her life in the present out of a fear that it might be ruined in the future. And all the while, what she is actually struggling with is the past. As Donald Winnicott explained in his insightful piece on the fear of breakdown, clinical fear of breakdown is the fear of a breakdown that has already been experienced. It is a fear of the original agony which caused the defense organization which the patient displays as an illness syndrome. Hancock is projecting her past traumas into the future, and so she has not yet been able to leave them where they belong, in the past. Instead, she tortures herself and torments everyone around her. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's frustrating, but mostly, it's just sad. Various explanations have been offered for how narcissistic organizations emerge, and honestly, I think almost all of them hold merit in some cases. Just as two people with depression may have completely different reasons for their condition, I doubt any two narcissists are completely the same. However, certain theories do seem to line up pretty well with Hancock's experience. Alfred Adler hypothesized that narcissistic disorders emerged from an initial state of insecurity, which would certainly apply here. Freud wrote of narcissism as a retreat away from the external and into the self. Of course, when the external world is hostile, a retreat of that kind seems almost natural. That also applies to Hancock. Nancy McWilliams summarizes the teachings of Heinz Kohut on the topic by saying that a narcissistic person can be imagined as a plant whose growth was stunted by too little water and sun at critical points. Similar to Freud's idea, the argument here is that an inhospitable external world induced this strained system of defense. I think that metaphor fits here perfectly. Hancock is like a plant, a vibrant flower, perhaps a marigold or a sandersonia, the most beautiful in the field, whose growth was stunted. Too little water, too little sun. But luckily, the sun god came to visit.
Part 3. A personal essay. Falling in love with Luffy. The key to writing a convincing romance is to make the audience feel like they are a part of it. If character A is going to fall in love with character B, the writer should usually make an attempt to let the audience know what it is about character B that character A finds so irresistible. Is it just physical attraction? Are they funny or charming? Do they have a fascinating hobby? Are they Maggie Chung? We're more likely to understand character A's interest if we can be convinced that character B is interesting. The great romantic writer doesn't just tell you that a character has fallen in love, they make you fall in love alongside them. The reason a film like The Apartment works so well is because, by the climax, you've grown to love both Jack Lemmon's Calvin and Shirley MacLaine's Fran. You see what they see in each other. You look at each through the other's eyes, and you can't help but want to see them together in the end. Oda is not big on romance. I mean, he loves capital R romance, as in adventure, but lowercase r romance, as in falling in love, has never been a focus in One Piece. But that doesn't mean he isn't capable. In fact, I think Amazon Lily is the arc that proves Oda is more than capable of writing a compelling romance, even if that isn't exactly what he set out to do. The story of Boa Hancock's slow and then sudden fall into total infatuation with Luffy falls cleanly within the framework we've outlined. Oda convinces us of the plausibility that Hancock could love Luffy by reminding us readers of many of the qualities we love about Luffy. He's got a stubborn, almost primitive sense of honor. When the Amazonian women who previously helped him are threatened during his fight with the Boa sisters, Luffy insists that they be left alone because they have nothing to do with the battle at hand. He really thinks of his fights like some kind of old-timey duel. Not for nothing, right now, you and me. A chapter later, when he covers Sandersonia's back to prevent their secret from being revealed, he reiterates this idea. In his mind, it's 1v1. May the best fighter win, even if that means giving up an advantage. There's something so noble about that. A kind of nobility I'm sure Hancock isn't used to seeing in men. It's easy to like the consistency too. Luffy isn't a hypocrite. It might be easy to understand why Luffy would object to Margaret getting shattered on the stone ground, but how many people in the One Piece world, or in our world, would throw themselves into a vulnerable position like that just to protect the dignity of someone who clearly hates them? Luffy didn't even hesitate. For him, this fight is personal, and so it's going to stay personal. There's no need for it to escalate to anything other than that. And that's another thing we all love about Luffy. He deals with people as people. He doesn't care about someone's title or class or rank. He cares about the kind of person they are. The townspeople think Chopper is a monster? Cool, Luffy loves monsters. The celestial dragons are untouchable gods on Earth? Get touched, dumbass. Luffy is equally at home partying with royalty in a recognized kingdom as he is partying with woodland creatures on a sky island. He really takes things for what they are. Of course, on the one hand, that terrifies Hancock. She's spent her entire adult life doing everything she can to keep people from knowing her on a real, personal, individual level. On the other hand, it's gotta feel so refreshing. When is the last time someone was able to look past her titles? The Snake Princess, the Pirate Empress, the Warlord, the most beautiful woman in the world. And before that, she was only known to the Celestial Dragons as yet another slave, not a person at all. Sure, it's anxiety-inducing to have someone like Luffy come along and refuse to show deference to the titles. But good lord of the coast, how exhilarating to be looked at as an individual again. To be treated like a flesh and blood human fucking being for the first time since childhood. We in the audience love and admire Luffy because of his ability to look past a person's circumstances and background and see them for what they are. But we can only imagine how much that must mean to her. It's worth pausing here to clarify something. I've seen a lot of people in the fanbase who seem to think that Hancock fell for Luffy because Luffy didn't find her attractive. The idea here being that she's basically a hot girl Stacy used to getting her way, and then the Chad Luffy came in and negged her into crushing on him. This literally could not be further from reality. Firstly, that's not stated or implied anywhere in the text. It's not even a bad read of the material, it's a full-blown hallucination. Secondly, the real aspect of Luffy's non-attraction that Hancock is clearly drawn to is that he doesn't objectify her. He sees her as a person. The point isn't that hot girls need to be knocked down a peg, you incel freaks. The point is that women are human beings, and they tend to like it when they are treated like human beings. And third, that is only one of the reasons she ends up falling for him. Don't think that just because you treat a woman like a human being that you are entitled to romantic reciprocation. In fact, treating her like a human being means giving up any expectations or feelings of entitlement. It's literally the baseline bare minimum. The bar is in freezing hell. But anyway, Luffy also has that rare mix of ambition and humility that we hope to find in all great people, but which seems to exist mostly in folktales and myths. Luffy has the will of a conqueror, but at the same time, he'll throw his whole life away for someone else's benefit. While Hancock is definitely shaken by his display with Sandersonia, she still knows deep down that Luffy, like all other men, and probably like all other people, is essentially selfish. And when she offers him the choice between saving his Amazonian friends and obtaining the ship he has been asking for, she knows what his decision will be. There's no doubt in her mind that he will sell out his comrades. But she's wrong. Luffy doesn't hesitate even a second before asking for his allies to be freed. Not only that, but he bows. The man with the conqueror's haki bows. He does it so fast that his head slams against the ground, and he thanks her. Also, Hancock might not understand the significance of it, but the reader will notice that his straw hat, his namesake and treasure, falls off and onto the ground as he does so. He has completely humbled himself before her in gratitude, all for the simple act of reversing the damage she did. No one in the Colosseum can believe it, but it's exactly the kind of thing we would expect from Luffy. They're just learning what we already knew. He's really that guy. He's also dumb, but again, in the most endearing way possible. Let me ask a question. After Luffy chooses Margaret and company over the ship, how exactly was he planning to get off the island? The answer is, he wasn't. He had no plan. He just knew he had to help out his pals, and that was it. That was the full extent of his thoughts on the matter. He didn't hesitate to answer the question because he didn't need to think it over. Or it might be more accurate to say that he couldn't think it over. Was punching Charlos the right thing to do, morally? Absolutely. Was it the smart thing to do? Absolutely fucking not, obviously. But that's who Luffy is. He does what's right, not what's smart. That's why we like him. That gif of Luffy knocking Charlos out went quadruple platinum with the fanbase. I can guarantee you there would not have been any gifs made of Luffy calmly deciding to look the other way for his own safety. It was stupid, it was reckless, it was incredible. And that's also Hancock's reaction when she learns about it. I didn't think such a fool could exist in this world. She loves him because he's stupid. He's a little dummy head. Nice 400-pound squat, bro. She just let me hit 'cause I'm Luffy. Hancock falls in love with Luffy for the same reason we all fall in love with Luffy. Our love isn't romantic, of course, but it isn't too difficult to see how it could be. We love Luffy because he's wonderfully stupid, and free, and loyal, and kind, and has a seemingly innate ability to locate good vibes. In Amazon Lily, Hancock is simply seeing in him all of the qualities every One Piece fan has already recognized. And we are seeing him from a new angle, through Hancock's eyes, and learning to love him all over again. To those of us with a certain disposition, we're also learning to love Hancock. On one level, we just want to see Luffy loved. It's the same impulse that makes us cheer for Bartolomeo. It's like meeting another One Piece fan. The natural urge to find sympathy with someone when they say, "Oh my god, I'd love that too." Or in this case, "I love him too." We all want to see our buddy get his flowers, and it warms our hearts to imagine him being cherished and showered with affection. It's like knowing someone has a crush on your friend. On another level, we're getting to know Hancock while she's getting to know Luffy. It's almost like Oda is putting us through a little courtship with her. Luffy is seducing her while she is seducing us. Let me put it this way. You meet an attractive woman. You learn a little bit about her personality, find out some basic biographical details, she offers you dinner, and then suddenly, she's trauma dumping to you. Folks, that sounds like a first date to me. Throughout Amazon Lily, Oda sketches us a portrait of a woman who is strong, independent, and dominant, but who is also sensitive, very silly, and kind of hanging on by a thread. She's like a One Piece take on a Fujimoto girl failure, years before Fujimoto first girl failed. By the end of the arc, you're so familiar with her inner world, her sore spots, her passions, that a lot of readers simply held on to her and never let go. There's a reason Hancock does so well on the popularity polls, despite barely being in the series. People fell in love with her. It's proof of Oda's power as a romance writer. He sold us on loving Hancock, and he sold us on Hancock's love for Luffy. And he also sold us on Hancock and Luffy being in love and getting married. Yes, this is suddenly a shipping video. Fuck you. You know that theory that One Piece will end with the world's biggest party? Well, it should be their wedding, and everyone should be invited. This is a Luhan channel, and you can't stop us. But I digress. There is one more point I want to make before I hand this back off to Kali. I have seen a lot of people say that Hancock falling in love with Luffy happened way too fast. They say that it was such a sudden change that it felt totally unrealistic. All I can say to that is, some of us are real top-tier yearners and lovers out here, and a slight breeze could have us head over heels. Sometimes, love strikes like an arrow and freezes you in place. It washes over you like rain from a hurricane, and it sweeps you out to sea. Love is not determined by how much time you spend together. No amount of time is too short to fall in love with someone, even if it's only a single day, even if it's only 11 short chapters.
Conclusion. Let 100 flowers bloom. These are by no means the only ways to approach the Amazon Lily arc. In the first outline of this video, there was a whole essay about Oda's unique spin on Greek mythology, and at one point there was going to be a bonus round where I did a Freudian dream analysis style interpretation of various symbols within the arc. I even briefly considered doing a whole anthropological thing about how an island of women could even function, its population dynamics, etc. All of those ideas ended up scrapped for one reason or another, mostly time. However, I hope we've proven the point. This arc has a lot to offer. But that still leaves the question, why has the arc been so overlooked if it has so much going on? As with most things, I don't think there's just one answer here. The process is a bit overdetermined. First, you have the obvious factor, misogyny. Most One Piece fans are men, and it's simply the case that the average man is going to have some biases. An arc that hinges on your ability to empathize with a woman is a bit of a trial for some. Male anime and manga fans, especially battle shonen nerds, are notorious for not consuming stories about women and girls in general. They aren't reading shoujo or josei manga, and many of them aren't even reading shonen written by or about women. They see the roles of women in manga only through the narrowest of lenses. That's why when you show them an island of women, they immediately think,
typical shonen harem story,
despite the fact that nothing of the sort is happening. To many battle shonen fans, women exist on the peripheries of stories, as eye candy, not as dynamic characters with their own stories to tell. So we shouldn't be shocked when Morge can't find anything but fan service in Amazon Lily. He just doesn't think that much about women in fiction. Second, we have the issue of the narrative turn, or turns. I won't go into this in too much detail here, as I might make a whole video about it in the future, but in the second half of the previous century, we collectively went through what some scholars have called the narrative turn. In essence, we began to prioritize plot above all else in writing and criticism. This was a broader cultural shift, so it happened in basically all mediums at the same time. Ask a modern writer what their novel is about, and they'll probably start telling you the outlines of the plot. I can't imagine Faulkner doing that if you asked him about Absalom. People on Book Talk recommend each other books based on the tropes they like. Enemies to lovers is not a theme or a symbol, it's a spoiler. We've all become obsessed with plot beats and mystery boxes, and we've basically lost the ability to engage with stories on other terms. If you show a surrealist film like Daisies to the average Marvel movie fan, you'd have to hide every gun in the house first. We've built several generations of people who find paintings boring unless there's a story behind them, and that doesn't bode well for Amazon Lily. In terms of plot, it is very straightforward. It's also quite short, and while it is super consequential in the long run, that isn't obvious on first read. But plot isn't the selling point of Amazon Lily. The arc is dense with themes and ideas. In fact, given its short length, it's probably one of the most conceptually dense arcs in the entire series. But people don't read for themes anymore. They don't read for styles or concepts. They read for plots. And since the arc isn't entirely consumed by plot, it must be filler. Third, though I won't say last because I could go on, there is a very real inertia that sets into fan bases, as with any culture. Take, for example, Marineford. It's a great arc. Everyone knows that. But because everyone knows that Marineford is a great arc, when content creators think about making videos about great arcs, Marineford is at the top of their list. So they make yet another video essay about why Marineford is such a great arc. Then, people watch their video, and they become even more convinced of the arc's greatness. The greater everyone thinks it is, the more content people want to make about it, and the more content people want to make about it, the greater everyone thinks it is. In the same way, people overlook Amazon Lily, so content creators end up overlooking it, and since there is no content being created to bring it to their attention, people can just keep overlooking the arc. This happens in every fan base, and One Piece is no exception. There are certain arcs that we will simply never stop talking about, analyzing every single minute detail until nothing is left. And there are certain arcs that you would be lucky to find a half-decent video on. But because these arcs have been left out to dry, they still have so much more to give. I think it's about time that content creators tried to shake up the meta. Put down the Water 7 script where you just recap what everyone else has already said about it, and drop that long Ring Long Land video essay. I mean, full disclosure, we didn't include clips from Murphy Napier's Amazon Lily review in the critical sections of this video, despite disagreeing with many of her points, because I genuinely respect her Fishman Island revisionism. I've seen people say that they hated Fishman Island until they watched her videos and realized it had a lot more going on than they had previously thought. And that is exactly the kind of work I want to see more of. Also, shout out to Kyle Entertainment for their massive video defending Syrup Village. An arc that I think only Kyle Entertainment and Joe are interested in defending. I think we need a lot more of that kind of thing. Let's ditch the groupthink and break the inertia. If this channel is good for anything, it's for looking at the series in a way no one else seems interested in. And hey, our view counts reflect that lack of interest. But we'll keep chugging along because we simply refuse to stay on the tracks that everyone else has already put down. We want to sail uncharted waters, discover new lands, and go on adventures that leave an impact. As the old Chinese saying goes, let 100 flowers bloom, let 100 schools of thought contend. And what flower is more beautiful in bloom than a lily?